Hi, and welcome to the Compassionate Men's interview series. Today I'm thrilled to be talking to one of my favorite teachers, Dr. Rick Hanson, author of The Buddha's Brain and Hardwiring Happiness. Welcome, Dr. Hanson. Thank you so much for being here, and congratulations on Hardwiring Happiness making the New York Times bestseller list.
Oh, thank you a lot, Kozo, and please call me Rick, or I'll have to call you Mr. Hattori or something.
Okay, Rick. So I'm going to start getting a little biographical feedback from you. A few times in your talks and in your writings, you've talked about landing in adulthood from the neck up, and you make this type of gesture. Can you explain what you mean by that, by landing in adulthood from the neck up, and how did you become whole again?
Uh, I like a lot of people, I think especially boys. I grew up in an environment that was a decent and loving home, but the messaging I got from, my parents, my peers, my culture altogether was that guys should be tough and strong, et cetera, et cetera. And in my own case, kind of playing to my strengths as a bright, nerdy, dorky kind of kid, I really moved into a pretty cerebral relationship to life. So you could see me starting to make this gesture. It's not like I'm cutting my neck off, my head off, although it felt like that. I was just living life from the neck up. Very rational, very Spock-like, as it were. And while there's a lot to be said for the capacity for a detached, objective, in some sense, impersonal analysis, like a lot of things, it was a strength gone too far. I think often how our strengths can become our greatest weaknesses because we get rewarded for our strengths. And, while we're aware of our weaknesses, we tend to not be so aware of the collateral damage that comes from too much of a good thing. So I definitely had way too much of a good thing. And I had to, as it were, as Samuel Bonder puts it, wake down. I had to wake down into my own body. And there was a whole process of reclamation that occurred during my college years, which occurred, right at the height, really, of the human potential movement. So at UCLA, a very, standard college institution, there was still a lot of opportunity in the culture and even in classes to explore pushing through the unconsciousness and the repression and the deadness, the numbness, the dissociation. Because in that dark continent, as it were, below the waterline, was a lot of buried pain. And so I had to be willing to feel those feelings and experience those experiences to let them flow and reclaim the entirety of me. I often think by metaphor that we're born, in a sense, in a vast estate, the entirety of our own consciousness, all that we can experience. I don't mean this in a mystical sense or anything metaphysical. I just mean the whole of our being, all our subpersonalities, all our feelings. So we have this vast estate, and what then often happens as we move through childhood and then even sometimes further into adulthood, we start fencing off portions of that estate with signs to say, do not go there, because either there was pain there or we think there could be pain there. Maybe because we watched other people go to those places and go into pain, or people told us that sex was shameful or anger was not allowed, or feeling confident or good about yourself is going to invite some kind of shaming attack. The old Japanese proverb, the nail that stands out gets hammered down. So for all those reasons, we kind of carve out these various parts of our psyche, and then we end up kind of living in this tiny gatehouse of this vast estate, and we call it home. And no wonder we feel pinched and that life is not worth living sometimes, or just kind of tepid. Life's like a tepid bath, just whatever. This is it? Are you kidding me? Right? But part of the problem is that we've, made choices that might have made sense at the time, especially when we were young, to restrict our life to this tiny little gatehouse. But what we need to do, I think, as adults is risk the dreaded experience. That's what I call it. And gradually take intelligent risks in terms of reclaiming parts of ourselves, in terms of full self-expression or fully experiencing ourselves, or trying things in the world that might expose us to certain kinds of experiences that we're afraid to have, like, starting that business, writing that book, asking that person out on a date, telling that person that you love that person, etc. But if we are willing to risk the dreaded experience, we can gradually reclaim these sectors, these subpersonalities, these modes of experiencing, these ways of expressing our true self. We can gradually reclaim it and feel whole again. And honestly, it's an ongoing process, but that very much was my own journey, especially in the 20s, to really reclaim my own being as a foundation then for other things I've done in my life.
Wow. Yeah. That's I could end the interview right there. That's so much wisdom right there. That's beautiful. Thank you, Rick. In one of our conversations, I was lamenting to you about how whenever I talked about compassion to men, they tuned out, or they shut up, or they walked away. And then you listed off a number of ways that compassion was useful and strong. And I don't expect you to remember the specifics of the conversation, but can you share with us how you see compassion as a strength?
Right. So defining terms, compassion, at bottom, the wish that a being not suffer, right? You are, driving down the road and you see a dog limping on its way home, and you think, oh, I wish you weren't limping, poor dog, etc. Or maybe there's someone in your life that's grappling with a tough situation. Maybe someone is aging, a parent, a friend of yours, someone in your family has a medical problem, and it's natural to wish that, oh, I wish life were not so hard for you. It doesn't mean that you're superior to them. I mean, there are connotations of pity that can be not simply compassionate, but move into a kind of superiority. I don't mean that. Compassion is deeply human. So that's what compassion is, usually with feelings associated with it of kind of warm-heartedness, sympathetic concern. So part one, compassion, internal compassion makes groups stronger. And if you want to build a team at work or a sports team or a military situation, it's really fundamental to have compassion for other members of your group. Part one. Part two, when we feel compassionate, that activates or increases the social engagement system in the brain, the attachment circuitry in the brain. And in the very act of giving a relational supply, we experience being fed in the moment. We experience our own heart warming up, which feeds us. So being compassionate toward them, irrespective of whether that helps us deal with other groups, but being compassionate toward others, let's say, helps us. It makes us warmer. It feeds us. And then the third major benefit is compassion helps us see the world more fully and truly. In a sense, reality is like a mosaic with many tiles. If you have compassion for different tiles, compassion for your customers, compassion for coworkers, compassion for family members, compassion for people on the other side of the political divide, by having compassion for them, compassion for your boss, for your parents-in-law, for your evil twin brother, what have you. Having compassion for these other characters helps you understand them more deeply from the inside out. You get more of a feeling of their motivations. You get more of a feeling for how life is difficult for them. And through understanding them from the inside out, you can be more effective in dealing with them. And so far, I've given you three major benefits for being compassionate that have nothing to do with morality. Obviously, as well, compassion is at the root of benevolence. If we don't really have some feeling for the suffering of others, our moral positions are dry and, from the neck up, going back to where we started here. It's when we integrate head and heart, when we integrate a sense of moral principle with also a warm-heartedness, that's when we bring all the pieces together and we're a lot more effective and functional with other people.
Yeah, that's beautiful because it's bringing the heart into it, right? And like not just it's physically too, right? It's bringing the heart into it. So physically you feel better. You're more relaxed, and yeah. You mentioned
so build on what you just said right there. That's a really great point because major circuits in the brain do multiple things. So here's another fourth benefit. Now you make me think of it. By strengthening our compassion for other people, we strengthen heart altogether. I mean heart, metaphorically speaking. There's some linkage between the brain and the cardiovascular system, and we probably do some good things to strengthen those linkages as well, so that we feel more integrated when we're compassionate for others. But what that also means is since neurons that fire together wire together. In the famous saying, when you stimulate any circuit, you strengthen it. So if you stimulate a circuit that does 2 or 3 different things, and you stimulate it, let's say it does A, B, and C, and you stimulate it by doing A, let's say feeling compassionate toward others, if that circuit also is very involved in courage, because the root of the word courage is cor, French for heart, right? By stimulating that circuit of heartfeltness for other people, that helps us have more heart, have strong heart in dealing with our lives, which obviously is a value for everybody, but certainly I think men in particular really appreciate, the power of developing a strong heart and courage.
Yeah, that's great. Like, compassion actually gives you that courage, right? Gives you the courage in the true sense of the word.
Yeah, I think so.
That's
now I'm
good.
going to have the courage to let my cat in.
Okay,
That's
no problem. No problem.
My little home office here. All right, great. You might even get a chance to see him. All right, let's keep going.
Okay, so I love your practice of taking in the good, but as a Buddhist, I've been told to not only be aware of aversion to bad experiences, but also be aware of attachment to good experiences. And in Hardwring Happiness, you quote this great saying, liking without wanting is heaven, while wanting without liking is hell. You also state that in the, quote, subcortex and brain stem, connected but separate circuits handle liking and wanting. Then you conclude that by taking in the good without wanting, you could, quote, gradually undo the habit of wanting itself, unquote. Can you explain these two separate brain phenomena and how by taking in the good, we can free ourselves from craving?
That's super deep. Okay, so there are a couple of levels to that. The first is that in the brain, in the subcortical regions, which emerged, which include the basal ganglia, which emerged with advanced reptiles and then were built upon further as mammals evolved, bringing in other parts of the brain and really developing these regions. So today we have the basal ganglia as well as the amygdala and the hippocampus, thalamus, hypothalamus, as part of the subcortical region, sometimes called the limbic system. Okay, that's the basics. Inside there are these little nodes in a part of the brain in the basal ganglia called the nucleus accumbens. These are regions that have funny names. Another name for this particular region is the ventral, which just means lower, striatum. So anybody can go on Wikipedia, what have you, and look up nucleus accumbens or ventral striatum, and you can start seeing some of this research. So these are fairly small parts of the brain. And inside these small parts of the brain are little nodes, maybe a few cubic millimeters in size, or, depending, but really pretty small. But inside those little small parts of the brain, you can pack, millions and millions of synapses, because you could put 5,000 synapses side by side in the width of a human hair. Synapses being the connections between neurons in the brain. Okay, so these different little nodes, certain nodes in the nucleus accumbens do liking for pleasant, other nodes do disliking of unpleasant, and then you have other related nodes that do wanting what's pleasant and or wanting not what's unpleasant. Right? So you can see already we have this disentangling anatomically of something that's disentangled psychologically. For example, if you imagine at the end of a wonderful meal and you've already had 2 desserts after getting completely stuffed, if your host, let's say, says, oh no, try a 3rd helping of this dessert and puts a little taste on your mouth, they might ask you, do you like it? Does it taste great? Then you would go, yeah, it's so delicious. And then they say, do you want some more? And you go, oh my God, no. So you can disentangle that. Flip the other way, you can see people often dealing with addictions. I think of people just pulling the slot machine mechanically over and over again in a casino and not even noticing it barely reacting when the machine occasionally pays off and they get some quarters in their little bucket there. That's wanting and not enjoying, right? So you see right there's a distinction between the two. And as you know, in the Buddhist psychological model of the mind, there's this very, very important transition from what's called in psychology the hedonic tone of experience as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, which as you know, Buddhist psychology is called the feeling tone, not because it's emotional, but it's more like how do we evaluate it, you know? Okay, so there's this transition from the nature of experiences, just in general, moment after moment after moment, to be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. There's an understandable transition in which there's a tendency to grasp after what's pleasant and get driven about it and compulsive about it and I gotta have it, or a tendency to start going to war with what's unpleasant, you know, fighting it, pushing it away, or getting angry about it or fearful about it, etc. And right there in that transition from the hedonic tone of an experience as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral into getting into wanting of various kinds, wanting for grasping after the pleasant or wanting not the unpleasant, that's where a lot of suffering begins. We, in the moment at least, can't do anything about whether our experience is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Over the long haul, we can gradually shift how the mind-brain system responds to various stimuli and experiences them as pleasant or unpleasant. For example, as people mature in their own psychological growth and also heal in various ways, let alone do spiritual practice, and again, much research shows this is true, they're more and more able to deal with challenges in life and without experiencing them as terribly unpleasant. Obviously, some things will be terribly unpleasant, you know, burning your foot or losing a loved one. It's innately unpleasant. It's inherent. The Buddha used the metaphor, as you know, that this is the first dart of life. It's the dart we can't avoid. It's unavoidable discomfort, physical or emotional discomfort, that having a human body makes us prey to. It's just the way it is. But we do have some choice about whether we add second, third, fourth, fifth darts that we throw ourselves to the initial unpleasantness of an experience. Or also we have a choice as to whether we start chasing after something that's pleasant in a way that's problematic for us. We might get too driven about it, or we might get so locked onto achieving that goal we don't see the collateral damage in our family. I know many men, for example, who've pursued careers, and that's great, but meanwhile, their 60 or 80-hour-a-week job is crowding out family life to the margins and everything else, which creates a lot of stress and secondary issues and so forth. So that's where you can see the tipping point. The tipping point is from liking into wanting. Now, for me as a person in general, and I think you know, thinking about the socialized role of many men as kind of strong providers and being ambitious and defined a lot. Women tend to be defined culturally by their relationship status. Men tend to be defined culturally by their career accomplishments. I'm not endorsing that. I'm just kind of naming it as a fact on the ground. But from the standpoint of, you know, drive towards success, whether it's a man or a woman who has that drive towards success, the interesting art for me, as a guy who's pretty driven towards success in my own way, right, is to find that sweet spot where, as I call it, you aspire without attachment. In other words, you swing for the fences, you dream big dreams. As Brene Brown puts it, you dare greatly. You're willing to risk the dreaded experience of aiming high and not making it. You know, you're willing to write a book and people are going to review it on Amazon, and you got to be willing to risk the dreaded experience that somebody doesn't like your book, right? And you got to live with that. So to be able to pursue what we like with passion and ambition and determination, you know, and directedness and strength of heart and willpower, to be able to do that without tipping over into the dark side of the force of getting driven and I gotta have it and angry if I'm thwarted. You know, we all know that tipping place, and it's a bit grayish zone, it's a little fuzzy, but we basically know the difference. And so for me then, to go specifically to your question, through repeatedly internalizing what it feels to enjoy something without getting all reactive about it. Or, for example, what it feels like to be strongly aspirational and determined and passionate and stubborn and serious and strong toward our career, let's say, or any other project. Maybe it's not a career type project, but it's something else we're doing. We're maybe building something or sticking up for somebody else, you know, protecting our children, our mates, our family, what have you. If you track what it feels like to do that in a way that's wholehearted and strong, but doesn't get driven or angry or compulsive or insistent or demanding. These are all clues, or pressured, right? In a problematic extent of pressured or super stressed, right? As long as we don't tip into that place, the red zone, I call it, as long as in effect we stay in the green zone of the brain, its responsive mode, as we deal with challenges, we can take in, we can register 10, 20 seconds at a time what it feels like to be strong and passionate and clear without getting caught up in drivenness and anger. And we can take that in. And gradually, by taking it in, we get more and more able to pursue big dreams while staying fundamentally centered and at peace inside ourselves with regard to what's pleasant. And flip the other way is we have experiences where we learn, in the psychological term is distress tolerance. You're seeing my cat come across the screen, his big tail. And anyway, so what I was saying there is that as we become more able to tolerate distress, to tolerate the unpleasant without tipping into, I hate it, I gotta, or as men commonly do, shut down the feelings. We become more able to, hey, I feel mad right now, but I don't have to act it out. Or I feel worried or scared or apprehensive. I have a sense of dread inside, but I don't have to be overwhelmed by that. There's a kind of inner shock absorber between me and what's pleasant or me and what's unpleasant. And then to finish up, as we repeatedly internalize the felt sense of our needs met, not just internalize what it feels like to like without wanting or dislike without going to war with things, in addition to internalizing that again and again and again, which helps us learn, and basically I'm talking about learning, emotional learning. We're learning how to like without wanting or dislike without going to war with it. In addition to that, as I write about in the book, as we repeatedly internalize the felt sense of our core needs being met, we become increasingly able to go through life with already having internalized a felt sense of our three fundamental needs for safety, satisfaction, and connection are handled. So then we can deal with challenges. We can deal with threats. We can deal with, disappointments or obstructions. We can deal with rejection, people not liking our book on Amazon or whatever. We can deal with all that kind of stuff without going into the red zone. And then our happiness and our well-being feels, oops, my cat's on my keyboard now. Our happiness and well-being feels increasingly unconditional, not based on external conditions. If you think about the nature of craving in the Buddhist frame, craving's the second noble truth that drives suffering. What's the end of craving? The end of craving is the third noble truth. Well, what craving is, neuropsychologically, is a drive state based on an underlying felt sense of disturbance or deficit. So if we gradually undo the internal sense of deficit or disturbance, and we gradually replace that with a sense of fullness instead of deficit, and balance instead of disturbance, then increasingly there's no actual basis for craving, right? We're still engaged in the world, we're still passionate, we're still making love, we're still cheering on our sports team, go the 49ers, et cetera, but we're not swept away and we're not controlled by, the dark side of the force, which again, I think in terms of motivation for everybody, but again, based on male socialization, to realize that the reactive mode of the brain, its red zone reactivity, which is driven by this machinery of reaction to the hedonic tone of experience, if we just let that process run automatically, we're being controlled.
So, Rick, I want to know, who are your teachers or role models for compassion, and when did they appear in your life?
Well, I think it's a great question. I'm taking it seriously. No one's ever asked me that, I honestly think, I had loving parenting. And also thinking back on it, I'm the firstborn of three, and as it turned out, my parents were actually in the middle of trying to adopt a child because my mother had miscarried 2, maybe 3 times. Sometimes it's not always clear when it's a miscarriage, or a heavy period, but in any case, 2 to 3 times before I was born, before my mom got actually pregnant with me and kept the baby. So I was very wanted. And then my mother's mother showed up. Grandmothers and also grandfathers too are really important for all kinds of reasons, including, in terms of biological evolution. So I think that's where my first teachers were. My own background is, I have a fair amount of background in developmental psychology and the 0 to 3 period, and receiving loving caregiving really tends to promote the capacity of a child who then is an adult 20 years later and longer to be caring themselves. And children who don't get a lot of caring often have to go through a fundamental healing process before they can be able to be truly caring themselves. So I think those are teachers for me in a variety of ways. I had a couple of school teachers who went out of their way for me. And what's interesting too is to appreciate, Koza, the power of little moments. I can think back on a little moment with my 4th grade teacher when I got into a fracas with a bully in our class, and I skipped a grade and I have a late birthday, so I was about 1.5 years, nearly 2 years younger than a lot of kids. But I'm kind of a stubborn guy, and this bully was really freaking me out. So I stabbed him with a pencil. Now that's not a good thing, okay? But there was a little twinkle in her eye when my 4th grade teacher, who'd been watching that bully terrorize the classroom, she sent us both out on detention to go look around, but she gave me a little look that let me know, good on you. You know what I mean? Like, we don't want kids stabbing each other with pencils, but good on you. Anyway, that's a little moment, and that made a big difference for me. So I think as adults now, do not underestimate the power of a moment of clear seeing. How often do we actually go through life and have someone look us in the eye or touch us on the arm, say, and even just in that moment, let us know that they understand. Now, men do that in all kinds of ways with each other that I think, frankly, a lot of women kind of miss or downvalue or devalue or poo-poo. But they're actually, I think of it as sort of like macho love. But when my buddies let me know something, I know they get it, and I feel supported, and I'm good to go. I don't need to talk about it with them for 20 minutes or longer, you know what I mean? But I'm good to go. So don't underestimate those little moments. And then beyond that, I think clearly there are exemplars who are extraordinary models in any domain. You think about great athletes and how they function. Like, I've done a lot of rock climbing. I'll watch videos of some of my favorite rock climbers, Chris Sharma, for example, and it's just great. And so watching him makes me a better climber. I'll never climb like Sharma, but I'm a better climber for watching him. In the same way, we may not have the profound compassion, of a Mother Teresa or a Nelson Mandela, say, or Aung San Suu Kyi in Burma, what have you, or someone in our own life who's not famous, but everybody in our church, our synagogue, our town, our neighborhood, or our extended family maybe, we all just go, oh my goodness, so-and-so is kind of a saint. We may not be that compassionate, but by studying those people and having them as models, it makes us a better person, which is partly why I think the research these days on monastics, typically of different kinds, monks and nuns, who really make the cultivation of compassion a central part of their very, very serious, multi-decade spiritual practice. These are people who are the Olympic athletes of compassion training. That's a metaphor that Richard Davidson has used to talk about them, one of the great researchers on compassion training. And what's interesting about those brains, by the way, of people who are really engaged with compassion, you may know this, is that what's also true is that as their warm-heartedness, as it were, starts increasing in terms of the neural circuitry, they start lighting up in a metaphorical sense, so too do motor circuits that are linked to compassion circuits. In other words, as we feel increasingly warm-hearted toward others, we're also increasingly inclined to do what we can to help them. Now, it's an important point. Your compassion can be authentic even if you can't do anything for the other person, right? You could feel sorry for and worried about and wish it didn't happen to people who are victims of a huge typhoon, let's say, on the other part of the world, even though you can't do anything. Or the little you can do is send some money to a relief fund. Okay, you can do something there. But on the whole, you can't make a big difference, but still your compassion is genuine. You can have compassion for someone who's got a serious illness, maybe a terminal illness. You can't do anything about it, but you still feel for them. So even if we're helpless, we can still have authentic compassion for others.
Mm. Yeah. I want to bring up something that you talked about. I love that story about your fourth grade teacher. And this is something that I've been practicing that um, I think, you're taking in the good practice. I think it's a wonderful, I don't know, thing you can share with your children. And in some way, she was teaching you to take in the good of that moment, right? Like with that little twinkle in her eye. And, I have two sons, so every once in a while, we'll just sit there and go, wow, that was great. Wasn't that a great day? Wow, how does that feel? And we'll take that in.
Yeah.
And I think that is the same kind of movement into the heart, the same kind of, and I think it'll develop some sort of compassion as well, right? This just, oh, let's sit with that. How lucky we are, how grateful we are, and I encourage everybody who's watching to, first of all, get Rick's book, Hardwiring Happiness, and find out about taking in the good, but then share it with your children. I can't think of a better way to enrich their lives.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. It's funny. I've done a lot of wilderness stuff, mostly around rock climbing. And, you think about, okay, I'm going out for a day or a week. What's in my backpack? What are my supplies? Food, water, first aid kit, some dessert, what have you. I want to get all the good stuff in there. So we got to get it into the backpack. In the same way as we ourselves go down the long and often hard road of life, what inner strengths do we have inside us? What determination, what resilience, what distress tolerance, as I talked about earlier, or what feelings of happiness, positive emotion is a very major resource for resilience and being able to deal with hard things. What mindfulness do we have? What capacity do we have to steady our own mind? What compassion do we have? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we want these strengths: confidence, imagination, the ability to control ourselves at work, or learn how to function with different people from different kinds of cultural backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. These are strengths of various kinds. How do you get them inside you? That's what my book's about. And to me, it's really interesting to appreciate that the neuropsychology of learning, because we're talking about learning, emotional learning mainly here, okay? The neuropsychology of learning says that it's a two-stage process. Stage one is activation. You actually have to have the experience in the first place. It's a momentary mental state. But then the crucial second stage, the crucial second stage is installation, where we take that fleeting mental state, we slow it down, we transfer it out of short-term memory buffers down into long-term storage, and we gradually encode it and begin to install it into lasting neural structure. If there's no transfer of short-term memory state, short-term mental state, if there's no transfer of short-term mental state to lasting neural trait, there's no learning. There's no growth. There's no learning curve. The moment was momentarily pleasant. It's better than a stick in the eye, but it has no lasting value. We left all that money on the table. We wasted it. And that's why when I think about what you just said about your children or what happened with my fourth grade teacher, with that little twinkle in the eye, she helped me have a momentary state. She helped me activate a positive experience of feeling seen and respected. I was a very lonely kid. I was afraid of getting in trouble. I was scared to go up against this bully, et cetera, et cetera. But I could feel that she recognized the courage inside me, that it took me as, I think I was 7 years old in fourth grade. Maybe I just turned 8. I was very young to do this thing. And she activated that state. That's great. But I have to tell you, I think what happened also is that I repeatedly went back and savored that memory. I relished it. And through repetition, I increasingly installed it as a trait. And that's what you're doing with your sons. You're both activating a state by calling their awareness to some truly, authentically good things in their life that happened that day, or ongoing conditions perhaps. And then especially, you're helping them savor it. You're helping them stay with it. I think kids register experiences faster because their nervous systems are more plastic. They're more malleable than adult nervous systems. But even as an adult, just staying with an experience a dozen or more seconds in a row is really going to help turn this passing mental state into a lasting neural trait that's the basis of the inner strengths we all want to have inside ourselves.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. You know, Rick, I just thought of something, and I just wanted to mention to you. The fact I know all about how like you were younger than all the kids growing up, you know, and you felt disconnected, and then this great story about your fourth grade teacher, and then that basically paving the way for you to develop the taking the good practice and your compassion practice and everything. And you just you remind me of, Rick, you remind me of Ender. You know who Ender's Game?
Oh my God! Wow,
because you
that's
know Ender was
a high honor.
yeah
Ender's a phenomenal character.
Yeah, and he was smaller.
I'll take it in. I'll take it in.
He was smaller than everyone, right? He was younger and smaller than everyone, and he had to outthink his opponent. He had to work from his heart, and then he also developed this tremendous compassion that basically didn't just save our world, but it saved the universe. You know, so. I mean, I just see you as, you know, Ender and Ender's Game. So I just wanted to mention that.
That's my praise, thanks. I'll try not let it go to my head,
yeah.
But I think just to play with that a second, one of the things that's powerful about the character Ender, for those who know the book, is that he has inside himself both a killer instinct. He has a very fierce capacity to annihilate his opponents and destroy them utterly. And on the other hand, he has enormous compassion for them. He has great empathy. He can really think inside them, and that makes him more effective. And for me, I think the challenges for, again, men, when we speak about men, we're really generalizing here with, you know, obviously a lot of exceptions. We've got to be careful about that. But that said, for men, how do we tame the wolf of hate that's inside everyone's heart, men and women alike? How do we draw upon the strengths that are available to us and those aspects of our character, you know, in terms of that, where we started, that vast estate we're born with, we're endowed with, that's the whole of the psyche. Yeah. There are parts of it that are fierce and can really go to a cruel, intense, even violent place, certainly an aggressive place. How do we draw upon those qualities, which biologically, on average, males are more aggressive than females, just generally? You can think about why. How do we draw upon those qualities, but in a way that doesn't tip in that critical point from, you know, something reasonable to something that's really dangerous and problematic? And I think through, paradoxically, repeatedly internalizing a true sense of your own strength and a sense that your core needs are met, you're fundamentally safe as you deal in life when you are. You're fundamentally full, there's enough that's in your world, and you're fundamentally connected. There are people who do care about you, who are your friend, who do have your back. As you have that more and more inside yourself, you become a peaceful warrior. You become more and more able to deal with the challenges in life in a strong way. Think about people like Nelson Mandela or Aung San Suu Kyi or various activists around the world, you know, Medicine Without Borders, you know, Amnesty International, people who are doing very important work that's strong, but they're staying peaceful in their heart while they're doing it. And through repeatedly learning and taking in the good of that experience of what it's like to be strong and centered without tipping over into the dark side, to me that's a fantastic way to draw upon the best of male socialization, protective warriors, without, you know, getting into trouble about it.
Yeah, it reminds me of I heard it from you. I don't know exactly who said it, but they described Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk, as a cloud, a butterfly, and a bulldozer.
You know? Yeah, that's exactly right. And I do want to say, if I could, though, I do think it's always really important to be careful about how we generalize about all the members of a group, all men or all women, from the average of the distribution. And language tends to force us to do that. You know, every water molecule is like every other water molecule. So if you know what the average water molecule is like, 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen, you're good to go, right? You just say water's like this. But you say the average man is more aggressive than the average woman. You know, the average 4-year-old boy is more aggressive than the average 4-year-old girl. You know, you got to be really careful about generalizing from that to all members of the group. And also, it's incredibly important to not underestimate the power of socialization. You know, just because a difference is reliably found in the average boy compared to the average girl, the average man compared to the average woman, doesn't mean at all that it's necessarily innate. It could be a very acquired difference. So I think we really need to keep that in mind and also appreciate that in general, the similarities are much greater than the differences. In other words, the variation among men or the variation among women is vastly greater than the variation between the average man and the average woman. Yeah.
Okay, so this is one of the toughest questions I've ever asked anybody. One of my favorite readings of yours is your essay "Eddies in the Stream," and if some of you viewers haven't read that, just type it into Google, "Eddies in the Stream," which is one of the most lucid and articulate descriptions of enlightenment I've ever encountered. Seriously, Rick. In this essay, you delineate a mnemonic state of infinite possibility that occurs neurologically, physically, and by physically I mean quantum, in terms of quantum physics, and spiritually. You call this state, quote, abiding in the stream, unquote. I was wondering if you could describe what abiding in the stream would look and feel like on a daily basis, or, I mean, we're talking a lot about kids in the previous questions. How would you tell an 8-year-old boy what abiding in the stream is and why he would want to do that?
You warned me, Koza, that this was going to be some kind of like major curveball. Well, I'm not sure I would try to talk with an 8-year-old about abiding in the stream. I would probably be more focused on, just kind of lightening up and relaxing and, appreciating the goodness inside himself, which is what I'd say to an 8-year-old girl, and also looking for opportunities to grow. I think maybe if I could digress slightly, to use the metaphor of Ender, for those who know that book, one thing that struck me reading the novel, and I've reread it multiple times, referred people to it, I don't know anybody who felt that the novel was, not deeply powerful. One thing about Ender is he's always looking for ways to learn and grow. He's always trying to develop and, in general, in my language, cultivate inner strengths of various kinds. And I think that's a fundamental question for people. How focused is a person on their own learning process as they go through each day or each minute or each hour? They say in Tibet that if you take care of the minutes, the years will take care of themselves. So in the most important minute of your life, which is always the next minute, right? Because it's the one we can actually do something with. In that most important minute of your life, are you looking for opportunities to let good learning land and to consolidate and stabilize your growth that's not yet fully consolidated, and look for new things that you could learn from and grow from? And in life, sometimes the range of opportunity is down here low in terms of what I could actually learn from this moment. Other times the range of opportunity is higher, right? But in that range, there's that fundamental increment, that delta. Are you at the high end or the low end of the range of your learning from this minute of your life, or this day, this week, this tough quarter at work, this issue in your family, and so forth? And I think that's a fundamental distinction for people, how motivated they are to look for opportunities to learn. And then in particular, this is where it's the X factor that comes in, learning how to learn, right? That's the magic bullet. As we learn better and better how to help our brain learn the good lessons in life, because we've got a brain that's biased, as you know, toward over-learning from the bad lessons of life. As we get more and more competent at, skillful at, again, a general value, but one that often, as a generalization, does speak to men, certainly, competency and mastery and skillfulness. How do we get more skillful at helping our brain learn and grow in the good ways, right? And I think what is true for me is that at a fairly early age, I realized that even though my life kind of sucked in a lot of ways, it wasn't horrible, but it was really pretty unhappy for a variety of reasons, including my own self-generated neurotic take on things as a kid and a teenager and even a young adult. But anyway, the key in a lot of ways to life is looking for opportunities to learn. So that's what I would really, really say to that 8-year-old. I'd say, hey, whatever's happened in the past, you can't do anything about, and you can't do anything about this exact moment of experience. But going forward, you can really set your future self up, the guy or gal you're going to be in 1 minute or 1 day, 1 week, 1 year, one lifetime. You can really set that person up in a sweet place, kind of giving to them, paying forward. I think that's, in a lot of ways, we haven't talked about this, self-compassion, where you wish that your future self not suffer and you wish that your future self be happy, right? So you want to kind of pay it forward, except you're paying it forward, in this example I'm giving, to the one being that you have the most power over and therefore the highest duty to, which is to say your future self. By setting that person up, through your learning today, you set that person up that will be you tomorrow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That's a great way to conclude, Rick. Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, there is so much in this interview. There's so much wisdom. There's so much research, and so much, not just wisdom and research, but so many like helpful tips that I think people can use to improve their lives. And I'm just so happy that I was able to tap your brain for all that. So thank you so
Great.
much.
Really nice collaboration here.
Yeah.
Great to hang with you. Nice
Yeah.
to talk with you.
All right. So for those of you who wanna find out more about Rick Hanson, I suggest Hardwiring Happiness. Get that first. Read that book because that will change your life immediately. Buddha's Brain's a great book. And then there's one other book that I kind of like every once in a while just flip open randomly. It's called Just One Thing. And then also Rick has a newsletter that's called Just One Thing, that if you subscribe to his list, you can go to
Net.
.com or .org.
Net.
Oh,
Rick
sorry,
Hanson,
.net.
SON.net.
.net. Yeah, you can subscribe to his newsletter, and he'll send you weekly just little excerpts of how you can improve your life. So check him out. Thank you, Rick, and
Thank you, Koza.
have a great day.
Great.